Picture this: you're a humble merchant in Mesopotamia, just trying to sell some dates and maybe a little watered-down wine. One day, your biggest problem is a customer haggling too aggressively. The next, your shop is burning, soldiers are looting your wares, and your camelies, your beloved camel, Darius, now hauling supplies for an invading army. Again, welcome to ancient Mesopotamia, the ultimate prize in a never-ending tug-of-war between two of the most dramatic empires in history, the Parthians and the Sassanids. If history were a soap opera, these two would be fighting over the same piece of land like a divorced couple who both refused to move out of the house. For centuries, the land between the Tigris and Euphrates was less of a peaceful civilization and more of a VIP section for military invasions, and the real victims, the ordinary civilians, who were just trying to live their lives, while warlords treated their cities like a chessboard. But don't worry, despite the destruction, taxation, and occasional forced conscription, the Mesopotamians did what they did best: survive. Now let's take a deep dive into how the people of Mesopotamia dealt with the absolute nonsense of the Parthian and Sassanid conflicts without losing their minds completely. The region of Mesopotamia had always been desirable. It had fertile land, booming trade routes, and a climate that wasn't entirely miserable, well, unless you were trying to farm during a war, in which case, good luck. But for most of its history, it had the misfortune of being sandwiched between great powers that couldn't resist fighting over it. The Parthians, the original rulers of Iran, were the first ones to make life extra complicated. They were experts in horseback warfare, known for their deadly Parthian shot, which involved riding away while shooting arrows backward. Imagine being a simple farmer and seeing an army of horsemen zoom past you, firing arrows in reverse like a bunch of overpowered NPCs in a strategy game. If you survived that, congratulations, you had about 5 minutes before the next army arrived. But the Parthians weren't just skilled warriors. They were also the masters of tax collection, which is a nice way of saying, give us your money or we'll burn down your village. Mesopotamian merchants, farmers, and artisans constantly had to deal with Parthian tax officials who had an incredible talent for finding new ways to squeeze more gold out of the locals. Oh, you're selling bread? That's a bread tax. Oh, you own a donkey? That's a donkey tax. Oh, you breathe air? Well, that's an existence tax. Despite all this, Mesopotamian cities still managed to thrive. Why? Because Mesopotamians were adaptable. When trade routes changed because of war, they moved their markets. When taxes got too high, they found loopholes. When soldiers invaded, they learned to act dumb. Oh no, sir, this is not a weapons shop. It's a pottery store. Please don't loot it. Then, just when Mesopotamians thought they had figured out how to live under Parthian rule, along came the Sassanids, who, spoiler alert, were not here to make things better. The Sassanids overthrew the Parthians in the 3rd century CE, and they had one goal: make Persia great again. Their rulers believed in centralized power, absolute monarchy, and most importantly, making sure that Mesopotamians never had a peaceful moment. One of the first things the Sassanids did was reorganize the tax system, which in theory should have made life easier. In reality, it just meant that Mesopotamians now had new and improved ways to lose their money. Farmers had to pay a land tax, merchants had to pay trade duties, and if you were really unlucky, you got drafted into the Sassanid army to fight Rome. Because, of course, Rome had to get involved at some point. And if you thought the Parthians were bad at keeping war away from civilians, the Sassanids made things even worse. Their wars against Rome turned Mesopotamian cities into battlegrounds, with some towns changing hands more often than a used chariot. One day, you had to bow to a Parthian governor. The next day, a Roman centurion was kicking down your door. And the day after that, a Sassanid general was making himself at home in your courtyard. It was like a really bad game of landlord. And if you thought the Parthians were bad at keeping war away from civilians, the Sassanids made things even worse. Their wars against Rome turned Mesopotamian cities into battlegrounds, with some towns changing hands more often than a used chariot. One day, you had to bow to a Parthian governor. The next day, a Roman centurion was kicking down your door. And the day after that, a Sassanid general was making himself at home in your courtyard. It was like a really bad game of landlord roulette. But the real problem was the Sassanid obsession with fortifications. They loved walls. They built walls around cities, walls around palaces, walls around their walls. Mesopotamian cities became heavily fortified strongholds, which sounds great until you realize that every time Rome invaded, those same walls turned the cities into war zones. Instead of running away, civilians were trapped inside their own homes, while flaming catapults crashed through their rooftops. Despite the constant warfare, Mesopotamians did what they always did. They adapted. When rulers changed, they changed their loyalty. When laws changed, they found ways to bend them. And when their cities were invaded, they did what all civilians throughout history have done, pretended they were too poor to be looted. One of the greatest skills of a Mesopotamian civilian was the ability to lie convincingly to a tax collector. Oh, this giant warehouse full of grain? That's not mine. I'm just watching it for a friend. Or, no, I don't own this shop. It belongs to my cousin's uncle's neighbor. It was the original version of I forgot my wallet when the bill arrived. Another key survival strategy was bribery. Soldiers, tax collectors, and officials could often be persuaded to leave a family alone for a price. If you had a few extra coins, you might just convince an occupying army that your home wasn't worth raiding. If you didn't, well, hopefully, you had good hiding spots. Religion also played a major role in helping civilians cope. The Sassanids were Zoroastrians, and their religious influence changed Mesopotamian culture significantly. While some citizens adopted Zoroastrian beliefs, others clung to their old gods, creating an interesting mix of traditions. When times got tough, prayers increased, and people made more offerings just in case one of the gods was listening. And through all this, Mesopotamian humor remained. There are actual records of jokes and satirical poems from the era mocking their rulers, proving that even in the worst of times, people still found ways to laugh at their misfortune. Oh, great. Another war? I was getting bored of having food. So, what can we learn from the poor, long-suffering people of Mesopotamia? First, history repeats itself. If you live in a strategically valuable area, expect world powers to treat your home like a prize in a never-ending contest. Second, never underestimate the power of adaptation, whether it was hiding wealth, pretending to be poor, or bribing the right officials. Mesopotamians found ways to survive. And finally, humor is a powerful weapon. When you're stuck between two empires trying to kill each other, sometimes all you can do is laugh and hope they take their war somewhere else. So after all those centuries of fighting, who won? The Parthians? The Sassanids? The Romans? None of them. Because in the grand scheme of history, empires rise, empires fall, and new rulers come along with the same bad habits. Mesopotamia remained one of the most fought-over regions in history, and while the names of the invaders changed, the struggles of the people remained the same. But through it all, Mesopotamians endured. And if they could survive centuries of wars, invasions, and aggressive tax collectors, maybe we can survive our own modern problems like overpriced rent and slow Wi-Fi. So next time you feel like complaining about a rough day, just remember, at least no one's burning down your city because two empires can't.